Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. Today it brings me a lot of excitement to finally bring you my review of the Hero figure from Masters of the Universe Revelation, the Masterverse series. Of course, the Masterverse series is the 6.5-inch, 7-inch line of figures from Mattel that's kind of the more premium adult collector aimed figures that has recently kind of divided itself into several sub-series of different figures. And this comes from the continuingly growing collection of Revelation figures. I kind of wonder at what point we'll start seeing it transition into Revolution figures, as we don't know much about the series yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mattel wasn't already hard at work on those. Of course, I know that there may be a few folks who look at this figure and aren't necessarily familiar with who Hero even is. Of course, Hero was meant to take over the brand, or at least bolster the brand alongside of He-Man as the new magical-based hero that was going to be introduced in the 87-88 line. Of course, that didn't end up happening, and Mattel's Masters of the Universe line ended up kind of bombing after the release of the film. They scrapped the plans for actual release of that figure. But after being released in Masters of the Universe Classics and then doing kind of a retro-like figure from Super 7, it seems like Hero was alive and well, finally making his animated debut in the Revelation cartoon, which I really appreciated seeing. And although his story has changed around a little bit here and there, essentially he remains the same. Since this figure was officially unveiled via Mattel, I have certainly had some concerns about it, and we're going to find out if this figure lives up to my love for the character. But before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Doing both of those things really helps us out. Also, be sure to comment down below at the end of the video and let me know what your thoughts and opinions are about this guy. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. First things first, we'll look at the packaging. I'm not a tremendous fan of the Masterverse packaging. It's always kind of struck me as a little plain. The frankly bizarre placement of the UPC at the top is a little strange. The figure itself is showcased just fine, and I do appreciate that they always identify the subline down here, and I like that red font of Revelation. On one side, there isn't too much to get excited about, just saying Hero, Heroic Cosmic Warrior, but on the other side, that's the part that's really the thing to get excited about, because it's some really terrific painted artwork of Hero, and I really like their interpretation of the character. It does seem like there's something maybe a little too whimsical about Hero back here. I'm not sure, but I still like the artwork quite a bit. It's not quite as good as the artwork on the side, but I do like that that is obviously the Eternia playset back there, so I do appreciate that. It says, armed with the magical sword of He and cosmic armor from the Temple of Power, Hero protected Eternia, both the Snake Men and the Horde Empire. Yes, unfortunately, we have a rather blatant typo here, proving that even the fine folks at Mattel certainly aren't immune to such a thing. Hero protected Eternia, both the Snake Men. I'm sure it's supposed to say from both the Snake Men and the Horde Empire. This ancestor of He-Man fought alongside the other heroes in the Ultimate Battleground and sacrificed himself to save King Grayskull. This seems to almost be just straight up from the Scott Knightlick Hero bio. However, if you look at what the front of the box says, this is supposed to be from Revelation, and if you looked at any of the comics, and thanks to my buddy TJ, he was able to let me read some of those comics. That's kind of a revisionist story for Hero. I don't really know what their intention is here. I have a feeling that this is just more or less supposed to be their modern interpretation of Hero and isn't so much a slave to the Revelation continuity, and I'm fine with that. All right, let's go ahead and get him out of the box. And now that we have Hero out of the packaging, it's pretty much impossible for me to discuss this figure without giving just a little bit of background. We have to think back to when this figure was actually first unveiled. To say that the initial images were a little underwhelming is probably an understatement. And all the proportions just seem to be so incredibly off. As a matter of fact, here's what I said about the figure. Next up, we got Hero. Now, I pride myself on being an absolutely huge Powers of Grayskull Hero nut. I've always been really invested in that canceled toy line. But I will say that I think the head sculpt is a little odd here, and the head just looks a little small for the body. He definitely is suffering from a little bit of that pinhead syndrome, just a little bit. And the sad part is that everything else looks really good, and I'm just rooting for this thing to turn out really well. I'm hoping that this whole kind of pinhead feel to the figure is just something that's from this early picture. Maybe they're going to revise that head a little bit, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this is still going to turn out okay. But for now, color me potentially concerned. As you can plainly see, things certainly have improved for this figure. Not only were there a few superficial changes made that helped to improve the figure, like correcting the color of Hero's jewel on the top of his logo there. There was also definitely some kind of improvement made from the original mock-up about how that head sat on the neck, and even perhaps the head size, although that's a little bit harder to say because they could have just resituated things and it made all the difference. I'm not 100% sure, but there even seems to be some sort of adjustment, even if it isn't to the sculpt of the head, maybe just to the application, something about the paintwork perhaps. Either way, things really came around, and I have to give this guy one of the most improved overall looks I've ever seen from a prototype to final product. And this brings me to a theme that I'm seeing in a lot of Masters of the Universe figures that Mattel is kind of doing early looks at, and then we're seeing the final product of. Most of the time with mass market stuff, when you see early looks, usually you're seeing something that's a lot better than what you're eventually going to get in hand. And that's the nature of hand-painted prototypes and things like that, and usually things are kind of diminished by the time you get them. But not so with Masters of the Universe, and I'm not sure what it is about Mattel's production pipeline that's happening that's causing things to actually turn out better in hand. But it's certainly, I don't know if they're doing some last-minute touch-ups. Judging by the recent tours Mattel has been giving of their facilities, it seems like so much of the prototyping they're able to actually do in-house now, which is probably streamlining some of the production of these figures. And there's not as much prototyping that's going on overseas, so they might have a lot more control of what's actually coming through. Whatever it is, keep it up, because it's really pretty magical to see a figure that really looked like it was in dire need of help turn out like this. I'll just go ahead and put it out there. Cards on the table here. Hero is probably my favorite Masters of the Universe character, and I know that sounds bizarre, but it was one of the things that absolutely inspired my initial love for Masters of the Universe in the first place. I mean, I was already into it, but as soon as I found out about this abandoned, secret plan to save He-Man from the 80s, and then, I already loved prehistoric stuff and dinosaurs, and seeing Hero for the first time, it was just incredible. Just the design work of the character, everything just clicked for me. And from then on, I was just an absolute diehard Preternia and Powers of Grayskull fan. And so anything that ever gets put into a He-Man line having to do with Hero, I'm always just so hyped for. And this is no exception. So I'm just going to lay the cards on the table and go ahead and say that this figure may thrill me way more than it will you, but that's just my view of the character. As we go through, maybe you'll see something you like as well. So let's go ahead and have a look at the details on the figure. Hero's scepter will return later on in the review, but I think for now it'll be a lot less cumbersome without it. First off, there's the head sculpt, which, as I said initially, was definitely something to be concerned about. And it wasn't just me. It was all over the internet, wherever you found Masters fans with reactions to these. It was just an overall real concern for how this was turning out. Something just wasn't right with that initial version. But now that we see the final version, this is an absolutely great way that they've gone here, because they've added all sorts of highlighting and shading everywhere on the face in order to kind of bring out the more gritty nature of the head sculpt. I think that it's of course meant to look somewhat like the Revelation version of Hero, but then again, the Revelation version of Hero is just standard Hero. Actually, more accurately, he's pretty much Masters of the Universe Classics Hero. And the Four Horsemen's mark that they left on Masters of the Universe can definitely be felt with this. it's so great to see it once again reinterpreted in figural form. And so I do think the head sculpt does a lot for that. I think the application, in terms of just paint application, is very solid here. Eye tampografts, which are just decal-like paint applications that they do. The subtle work on the lips and the chin and kind of the wrinkles within the face. There's a really cool, I don't know if there's kind of a wash or something applied even on the cheeks there to bring out the cheekbones. It's not just my lighting that's causing his face to have all these highlights. It might be printed on. I'm not 100% sure, but I like the effect. The one thing that I'm not so crazy about is they did some of it on the nose for better or worse, and it kind of makes the nose look a little splotchy in the front. I definitely know what they're going for there. It's like a comic book kind of shading sort of thing. And overall, I think it does more good than it does bad. I also love the hair sculpt as you go around. I love that they have the mullet kind of flailing back there. I also like that they did a good job of retaining Hiro's just comb over without looking too plain. Moving on down, you have these interesting little clamps here for his cape. And you can see that there's almost leather little clamps in the front. This is one of the only areas actually that it does vary from the Masters of the Universe Classics design. And it's one of the only ways that this kind of is its own thing, especially like I said with the transition. Now, I think that there could have been some better artistry going on here instead of just these big gray clamps right here. They kind of seem a little too toyetic when they could have just transitioned those into more buckles or something, but maybe that had something to do with production. You can see that the transition to the cape is actually quite nice in the back. The cape kind of naturally just folds back on itself like this so that it's not, sprawling out like a Spawn or Batman or something, but the cape just kind of folds in right there. You can see that the body is quite familiar with abs and biceps and shoulders that we've seen on He-Man figures before, so that's nothing surprising. What is interesting though are these cool new gauntlets. Now these are of course meant to look like the originals and look quite a bit like the Masters of the Universe Classics ones, but of course these are more in line with what we saw in the animation. Moving on down, Hiro has his distinctive trunks here, which are very much like what we saw in Masters Classics, having a very similar design, but there's some things about it that are a little more stylized. You can see that that's just a rubber overlay, and the actual midsection piece in there is just blue to match it, so none of that detail gets broken up. Interestingly, they do take the same route as Masters Classics by having the belly button, like a bare chest like piece down here under it, which I always thought was funny on the Classics version, and that weird little visual thing returns here. Even though on my camera it's showing up like there's a big difference in the flesh tones here between this and this, it's not that noticeable in person, but certainly the camera perceives things a little differently than our eyes do. And down here we have more of like a stylized take on Hiro's boots that are definitely more animation looking. Masters Universe Classic style of these boots were a lot more detailed. Without the cape, you can see that we have the back of the armor here, very plain back of the trunks, and just the back of the boots. No surprises on the bottoms of the shoes. Out of all the hues that action figure makers try to reproduce, definitely gold is the most interesting one because it's always handled in a variety of ways. The truth is that there's only one section of gold paint on this entire figure, and that paint hit comes right along Hiro's headband. Every other instance of gold in the figure is achieved through some kind of plastic. That means that on the upper chest armor, you've definitely got just a kind of more dull gold plastic going here. And then you have a plastic mix for the midsection here, but it's a little lighter than this. It's not entirely noticeable, but it certainly, if you look at it long enough, you can definitely tell the difference. And down here, the boots kind of do their own thing with a kind of more glittery gold mix. So that's always something that action figures struggle with. See Goldar from Power Rangers Lightning Collection. But in my opinion, the worst result that you can get when you're trying to get that gold is to get something that just looks yellow or mustardy. And I'm happy to say that that doesn't happen in any section of this figure. Maybe it's a little darker than it should be. Maybe it's not quite as shiny as it could be. The truth is you're not going to get that perfect gold effect unless paint is utilized. and it's just not here. Now that we've kind of gotten a feel for all the details of the figure, we should definitely just quickly look at articulation, because it's about the same as it always is. The head has a tremendous amount of range. It really does. Able to go down really far, back pretty far, left and right. He can cock his head side to side, and he can't really look up that well. So that's kind of the one limitation, but he can look way down, so he can be totally ashamed of himself. Moving on to the arms. Just like He-Man's arms usually with these figures, you can go about 90, a little bit better. You can go all the way around. Nothing's inhibited thanks to his sleeveless look. You do have a bicep swivel. You have double joints right here, and the gauntlets don't really inhibit those much, so that's good. You can see that we have a side-to-side movement with a hinge there at the hands. There is also, of course, wrist rotation. The chest has plenty of movement, actually. And they designed the upper chest piece in such a way to where it wouldn't inhibit any of the original articulation found on the old He-Man chest piece. Then we go left to right at the waist. Down here at the legs, thankfully, the trunks piece isn't as inhibitive as, say, like He-Man's furry underwear. So you can actually get a pretty decent kick, which usually you can't get with a lot of the He-Man figures because of loincloths and the furry underwear. We do have a side-to-side motion at the thighs. He can do these splits pretty much all the way out. The legs can go back just a little. There is a double joint at the knee, which is very effective. There is a side-to-side rotation at the boot. There is a pretty decent hinge right here, and you can see that it goes pretty far back, pretty far forwards. The sculpting is what holds it from going any bit further right up here because of this part of the boot, and there's plenty of side-to-side rocker ankle pivot. So much so that you can see that even the widest stances really aren't a problem for Hero. Let's talk about accessories really quick. Of course, Hero does come with a couple of extra hands. This is kind of standard now for Masterverse. It's kind of easy to take these for granted, but I don't intend to. It's just something that happens. You get your fist and you get an open hand. So these are definitely something we've gotten used to seeing. Of course, the biggest accessory of them all is Hero's Power Scepter. Now, of course, the scepter is a really nice piece of design work that was originally created for that abandoned toy, and it was meant to be kind of the big new weapon since he would be the master of magic in this. And the cool thing about it is it transforms. You can peel back the layers, kind of like a flower opening up, and inside is this powerful gem, and Hero's able to cast spells using it. Now, originally in the Classics version, there were several chase variants of this, with certain ones, purple and red and things, being more rare than green, and green was your standard version. I really like this on the inside, and I really like this kind of weird, murky green plastic. It almost looks Arctic in a way. It kind of gets your hopes up that it's going to be glow in the dark, but it isn't. It's just meant to have this kind of weird frosted look to it. So I think that would have been really nice had it been glow in the dark, but it wasn't. I really do like the action feature, if you can call it that, because it is very, very sturdy. You can put it any which way, and these are just not coming loose. You might have seen earlier that I was locking them into place, and you can see that it's very sturdy as you bring it back up. And of course, I know that those joints will kind of wear down over time, and however they're doing it here, it kind of clamps back together and it's not coming back apart. So I really do like that. I think it's the kind of thing that's going to look good either way. What is interesting is that there's no painted detail whatsoever. And that's unfortunate. It's all this gold plastic and then a more opaque plastic right up here. I suppose that the plastic had to be changed for some kind of stability right here. You can notice it if you're looking pretty closely, but it's not that bad. Again, I'm just glad it's not that mustardy yellow, and at least it's just a little dull. And that's okay, because I think that it does the job pretty nicely for a mass market figure. Of course, there's going to be several comparisons throughout the review, but by far the most important comparison and the most pressing one to see is this one. And it's between the Masters of the Universe Classics version of Hero, which was done as a Comic-Con exclusive, I think for 2009. It's been a while now. But then we have, of course, our new version. And there's quite a bit of difference here, so let's get right to it. By far, of course, the beefier, bulkier one is going to be this one right here. You can tell right away that the proportions, especially with the armor piece over the already gigantic Masters of the Universe Classics chest, he is a beefy boy. And over here, Hero definitely is not as beefed out. And it's just a difference in style. We've already seen this kind of difference, of course, with the He-Man figures that we've seen in the line. And it's just to be expected, I think, at this point. So what about the head sculpt? I think I've always liked what the Horseman did with Hero back with that exclusive. I think it was good. I was never sure that I saw the original figure as much in it. I always felt like that it deviated a little from the original prototype toy. But then again, now that we see this new Hero head, it deviates in its own way as well. So for me, there's not as much of a valley of difference as I thought there would be between these two head sculpts. As a matter of fact, it's just really, to me, it feels more like a difference of style at this point, with really this one feeling a little mannequin-esque, I think, as time has gone on. And I think that might be down to some of the paint application at the time. You didn't have as many options. I think here maybe the sculpt is helped a little by some of the modern paint application processes. I think that one of the biggest differences is that this is more of a neutral head. This one is more of an angry head. And yet you have the original, which is obviously a smiling head. So it's a weird thing that they keep deviating from that, which I would love it, just to get the Hero with smiling. And it's funny, I know the Super 7 one came out, but that head sculpt didn't do it for me either. But I think they're both effective in their own way. One of the bigger differences, of course, that you're going to see here are the capes. You do have a soft goods cape right here, which is nice, I think, in its own way. And of course, the original figure, the prototype, had a soft goods cape. This, of course, is your hard plastic. I think they both have their own merits. I don't necessarily see one being better than the other here. They're just different. These boots are a lot more ornate, and they're definitely Four Horsemen boots. You can see that if we go down a little bit lower, it's even more obvious once you get a better angle. These are very plain. They're very animated-esque. These are extremely ornate. So I do think there's a big difference there. I also think the same thing could be said about his gauntlet pieces, with these being a little more flat and these being extremely ornate. And once again, having that Four Horsemen armor style that we're so familiar with. Anytime the He-Man buck body is involved, the figures turn out quite a bit taller than Masters Universe Classics. But the biggest, most obvious difference, I feel, is the color palette. You have these really deep, beautiful golds over here because all of this is paint. Over here, we have a factory plastic. It's an approximation to gold. That's probably one of the biggest visual differences. But you also have to keep this in mind. This was a Comic-Con exclusive figure, and even though it was $25 at the time, adjusted with the insane rates of inflation, that would be a much, much more expensive figure to us right now, were it to come out today. You would probably be looking at this being like a $35 release or something. And this one, on the other hand, right now coming in at right about $21.99, $22.99, depending on where you get it. I got mine from Big Bad Toy Store. That's a heck of a difference. I think that's what we're seeing overall with Masterverse quite a bit. I mean, to put it simply, in a lot of ways, it's like it's trying to achieve a lot of the things Masters Classics did, only on a mass production kind of budget and price target. And I actually think it's pretty admirable what they were able to achieve here for the price point to get it out to the masses. And I don't think it's any kind of slouch compared to this one. I don't think it mops the floor with it or anything, and I don't think that it beats it necessarily, but I think it's pretty serviceable for what it is. I mean, even with all the missing paint details, even on like the scepter here, having the silver heads, the scepter being painted this nice gold, and then that just not existing over here, I still say it looks very nice for what it is, and they've done a good job approximating the gold without being a con exclusive figure, without being expensive, and of course it doesn't have that premium deco that this guy had to work with. So I think it does a serviceable job of being a hero for the mass market. Of course, if we want a Revelation style comparison, we'll of course put him with He-Man here, and he does a good job of just being comparable. They're practically the same size since a lot of the parts are reused between them. Of course, you can't not do a comparison to the newest member of the Masterverse family, Battle Armor He-Man, and of course they look pretty great together, honestly. And of course we have to do a comparison with the standard New Eternia He-Man. And here Hero is with his father, maybe, according to the comics. This is, of course, him with the Revelation version of King Grayskull, and they look really good together. Of course, anybody who knows anything about the history of this forgotten concept of Hero knows that he would have had a mentor Merlin-like character named Eldar. They did do this character in Masters of the Universe Classics, and as long as you say that Hero is a little taller than him, it honestly works pretty well. So what could they have done any differently or have done better with Hero? Well, of course, if you lived in some kind of fantasy world, you could say that they could have applied gold paint to all the gold pieces. Now, that's just not going to happen for a mass market figure that is already coming in on the cheaper end. And I know that's hard to believe for a figure that clocks in at $21.99 or $20 or whatever for a 7-inch, 6-inch figure, but it really is. You've got McFarlane that's kind of holding steady at that price tag, but it's starting to go away. That's evaporating quickly with Marvel Legends and Star Wars Black Series. Hasbro, of course, always leading the charge with raising the prices in the marketplace. So what could they have done? Well, I think they pretty comfortably could have included the Sword of He with him. And had they done that, they should have, of course, put it in blue translucents like the original Classics release did. I think that's would have been pretty cool, would have been pretty easy to do. I also understand this is a fairly large accessory. It has multiple moving parts, so I definitely understand why that was the only accessory, but still. And then I would have loved to have seen one alternate head. It is interesting and maybe slightly telling that a lot of the artwork on the packaging shows Hero smiling and even baring his teeth, and this is the frowniest Hero head you could possibly imagine. I think it looks good, and it's certainly nice to have a more serious Hero. He certainly wouldn't be smiling like a buffoon in the middle of a fight. I just wonder if that wouldn't have been a possibility, because we have seen some of the other figures every now and then include an alternate head, but it does seem like some of the alternate heads are being reserved for the deluxe figures now, and I certainly am glad that Hero here is not a deluxe release. For whatever reason, they feel the need to secure these capes in the packaging with little plastic anchors. There's a little tiny hole through the cape as a result of those anchors, so that's probably something they should avoid in the future. I may be wrong here, but I'm tempted to say that this will be the review that you watch of this figure from probably the biggest Hero fan that there is reviewing this figure. I have been fascinated by Hero and thrilled by Hero and all the Powers of Grayskull stuff for so many years that getting Hero right in the modern era was a big deal to me. I think they've gotten him right. I really do. I think this is a really good release, particularly when you see this as a mass market release. There's lots of articulation here. The accessory is really nice, and they've taken what could have been an absolutely disastrous release when looking at that prototype, and they fixed most everything about it that I just wasn't sure of. And I have to say that's a pretty great victory. So is Hero worth the $21.99? Of course he is. Yeah, it's a very well done figure. The sculpting is very effective for what you get. There's plenty of paint application where it needs to be, and overall it's just a lovely figure. He poses very well. He looks great from a variety of angles. This is an excellent release from Mattel, and I think it's worth every bit of a $21.99. The one thing I'm worried about is I'm really hoping that we've not seen the last of Hero, and recently Rob David said that indeed we would see more of that, but I hope it's not just flashbacks. I hope that there is still a place for Preternia in that continuity, because I think it is such a valuable part of the mythos. And with that being said, I surely do want to thank you for watching the review, and it means the world to us here at Fanboys Forever just to have you sit with us for a while and listen to us ramble about figures. Of course, we do want to ask that you please subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed what you saw here today, and we'd be thrilled if you like the video as well, because that helps it get shared out. We also want to encourage you to leave a comment down below and let us know what you think about this release of Hero. Were you impressed by it, or did it leave you wanting? And as I always say, God bless you and yours. And I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.